People imagine betrayal arrives like thunder. It doesn't. It comes quietly, in fine leather shoes, with your surname embossed on the briefcase that carries your ruin. The morning it happened, the sea mist rolled over the lawn like slow smoke. I just finished my black coffee, the way Margaret used to make it, strong enough to wake the dead. I remember setting the mug down on the marble counter, admiring how the light cut through the glass walls of Whitmore Point. My home. My life's crown. Grandfather, Ethan said, stepping into the kitchen, his tone too even, too careful. We need to talk about the trust transition. He was wearing one of my old cufflinks, the Whitmore crest, a silver falcon. He'd taken to wearing them since I retired last year. I thought it was pride. I see now it was rehearsal. Transition? I asked. You already have a seat on the board, don't you? It's not about the company, he said, sliding a folder onto the counter. It's about the estate. The lawyers advised we expedite the power of attorney, just in case something happens. I laughed. Something happens? Ethan, I'm 79, not 99. I play golf every Tuesday. He smiled thinly. You fell last month. I tripped over your sneakers. His jaw tightened. It's just precautionary. You wouldn't want the press to think you're losing grip. There it was, that phrase. Losing grip. I'd heard it whispered at the club, murmured by advisors half my age. They'd say it as though wealth made you immortal and age made you contagious. I didn't sign. I refused. I told him a man who built an empire with his bare hands doesn't surrender with a pen stroke. He nodded, polite, almost tender, and left. That evening, when I returned from my walk along the cliff, the gates wouldn't open. The security guard, new face, unfamiliar, stepped forward. Sorry, sir. Mr. Ethan Whitmore's orders. You're not authorized entry. I thought he was joking. I laughed again. Then I saw the way his eyes flicked to the earpiece, the way the gate sensors didn't even register my car. My name, my fingerprint, was deleted. I called Ethan. Straight to voicemail. I called my lawyer, Daniel Croft. He didn't answer. Within an hour, 2 men from a private firm arrived with papers. Emergency guardianship order, they said. Concerns about your capacity to manage finances. Capacity. That word cut deeper than any blade. They escorted me to a waiting car, gently, as if helping an old man across the street. Behind me, the gates closed, and the falcon crest gleamed cold against the iron. They left me at a small apartment complex I hadn't seen in 40 years, a place I once bought for my foreman as a retirement gift. No security, no staff, no Margaret's roses. Just peeling paint and a single key in my hand. I sat on the narrow bed, staring at the city skyline, and thought, he's taken everything. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mr. Whitmore, a familiar voice said. It was Daniel Croft at last. I couldn't speak earlier. They were watching. But you should know, not all of your documents were in that folder. You once asked me to store something separately. A deed you signed with your late wife. Do you recall the blue envelope? I did. Margaret's handwriting, tied with a ribbon, labeled, in case he forgets. My hands trembled, but for the first time that day, it wasn't from age. Daniel, I said quietly, find it. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Old habits don't die with fortune, they just lose their coffee machine and their view of the sea. The room smelled faintly of dust and detergent, the sort of scent that reminds you you're somewhere temporary. I made coffee in a dented kettle I found under the sink. It tasted like rust, but it burned enough to keep my thoughts sharp. Daniel called at 7. His voice was hushed, wary, like a man speaking through closed blinds. I checked the vault, he said. You were right, there's a sealed envelope marked in your wife's handwriting. Blue ribbon, dated 15 years ago. Margaret, I whispered. Her name still carried weight in the air, like a prayer. She instructed me to keep it sealed unless both you and your grandson signed a mutual consent release, Daniel continued. But under the current circumstances. She would want it opened, I said firmly. Ethan's signature means nothing if his heart's gone rotten. There was silence. Then Daniel sighed. Then meet me tonight. Quietly. My office after hours. Don't drive the same car twice. It felt absurd, cloak and dagger nonsense, like something from the films I used to laugh at. But betrayal makes even the most rational man superstitious. The day crept by. I walked through the city, watching young men in suits pass with the same arrogance I once wore. I wasn't bitter, not yet. Just stunned at how quickly a lifetime can vanish into paperwork and signatures. A few of my old acquaintances called after seeing the tabloids. The Hartford Chronicle headline read, Whitmore patriarch steps down amid health concerns. Steps down. That phrase mocked me. I hadn't stepped anywhere. I'd been pushed. At noon, a courier arrived with a legal envelope. Inside was a notarized document, petition for permanent guardianship of assets, filed by Ethan. He claimed, cognitive decline, possible early dementia. The signatures were dated 3 days before he'd locked me out. He'd planned this for weeks. But beneath the rage, another thought pulsed, Margaret. She had seen things before I did, always. When she insisted on setting up that joint deed revision years ago, I'd laughed it off as romantic paranoia. What if someday you forget something, she'd said. Then at least, paper will remember for you. Paper remembers. By evening, I was waiting outside Daniel's office, a narrow colonial building on Church Street, shutters closed, lights low. He opened the side door and waved me in. He looked older than I remembered, thinner hair, heavier eyes, but his handshake was steady. Still in one piece, I see, he said. Barely. But I've traded champagne for instant coffee, so I suppose I'm now officially humble. He managed a weak smile and led me into the conference room. On the table lay a small fireproof case. He unlocked it with deliberate care, then lifted out the envelope. Pale blue, faintly yellowed at the corners. Margaret's cursive looped across it in navy ink, in case he forgets, deed and declaration. My throat tightened. Daniel placed it in my hands. You want me to open it? He asked. No, I said. I'll do it. The ribbon fell away with a sigh, like something exhaling after years in the dark. Inside were 2 documents, one typed, one handwritten. The typed page was formal, a transfer of beneficial ownership agreement. It outlined that the Whitmore estate, including Whitmore Point, the surrounding acreage, and all trust dividends, was to remain under joint lifetime tenancy between myself and Margaret. Upon her death, her share would pass not to our next of kin, but to a separate charitable foundation she had named the Whitmore Heritage Trust. It was her way of ensuring our family's name served the town, not just our bloodline. But there was more. The handwritten note in her soft, looping script read. Edward, if you ever find yourself alone and surrounded by greed, remember, the house was built on love, not inheritance. This deed keeps it that way. The foundation holds the land, but only you can unlock it. The title key is in your father's compass, the one you kept by the sea window. My heart stuttered. That compass, brass, engraved with my initials, sat on my desk at the manor for decades. Ethan used to play with it as a boy. I had thought he'd stolen it years ago. But if it was still there, if he hadn't destroyed it, it could hold proof of ownership. A key, literal or symbolic, to the estate. Daniel leaned forward. Do you understand what this means? Ethan may control the accounts, but if we can produce the original deed, the property itself isn't legally his to sell or mortgage. The trust supersedes his guardianship. So he's sitting on a stolen throne, I muttered. Exactly. We can move to challenge his authority, if we have the compass. That night, I barely slept. Rain hammered against the apartment windows like impatient fingers. I turned Margaret's letter over and over, tracing her handwriting. I could almost hear her voice again, steady, kind, pragmatic. Plan for the worst, Eddie. Even family can forget what love means when money speaks louder. She'd been right. Ethan wasn't born cruel, he was raised on applause. I made him rich before he earned it. Maybe this was my punishment, mistaking privilege for love. Still, I wasn't done. I'd built ships strong enough to weather Atlantic storms. I could weather this. At dawn, I packed a single bag. A coat, an old photograph, Margaret's note. Then I called the only person I trusted still loyal, the groundskeeper from Whitmore Point, Samuel Bates. When he answered, his voice trembled. Mr. Whitmore? Is it really you? They told us you'd moved abroad. I've moved all right, I said dryly. Out of my own home. Listen, Sam, I need a favor. The brass compass on my old desk, is it still there? A pause. Then, it's in the study drawer. Ethan wanted it appraised, but I hid it. Didn't feel right letting anyone touch it. I closed my eyes. Relief flooded through me like sunlight breaking storm clouds. Sam, you just might have saved me, I said. He hesitated. What do you want me to do with it? Bring it to me. Quietly. And Sam, don't let anyone know. That morning, I looked out over the harbor. The city gleamed indifferent, oblivious to the small war about to begin. My grandson might own my accounts. But my wife, God bless her foresight, had given me something stronger than money, a thread of truth. And I planned to pull it until the whole web came down. By mid-afternoon, Samuel arrived with a brown paper bag, looking around nervously like he expected Ethan's men to drop from the ceiling. I met him at a small diner off Main Street. The smell of coffee and frying bacon was oddly comforting, ordinary, safe. Here it is, sir, Samuel said, setting the bag down carefully. No one touched it. Not even the appraiser. I reached in and lifted the compass. The brass was cold and heavy, engraved with my initials and a tiny hawk etched into the lid. It felt like holding a miniature anchor from a ship I'd once sailed in my youth. But it wasn't the metal that mattered, it was what Margaret had hinted at, a hidden compartment. Samuel frowned. What do you mean, sir? I smiled, a small, determined curl of my lips. Let's just say Margaret liked puzzles. This compass is one. Back at my apartment, I examined it over a magnifying glass. There was a tiny seam along the bottom, almost imperceptible. Pressing gently, a small panel clicked open. Inside was a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age, stamped with the Whitmore family crest. My pulse quickened as I carefully unfolded it. It was a codicil, a legal amendment to the original trust documents. Typed, signed by Margaret and notarized years ago, it specified something crucial. In the event that Edward Whitmore's direct descendant assumes control of the estate in a manner deemed injurious to the property or family legacy, the foundation retains the right to override any temporary guardianship or control, provided the original deeds are presented and verified. I read it twice, then 3 times. Ethan had stolen my accounts, locked me out, and declared me incompetent. But legally? Margaret had built a failsafe, a clause powerful enough to void his authority over the property itself. My thoughts raced. We had leverage, yes. But we needed more than paper. We needed witnesses, evidence of his mismanagement, proof that his claim to ownership was illegitimate. And, most importantly, we needed a strategy that didn't let him suspect we were onto him. I called Daniel again. His relief was audible through the phone. "This codicil changes everything," he said. "We can petition the court for immediate injunction. But you need to be cautious. Ethan will fight. He's ruthless when he senses weakness." "I know," I said. "I've been patient for 79 years. I can be patient a little longer." That evening, I met Clara Whitmore, my sister-in-law, widow of my late brother, and one of the few family members who had always distrusted Ethan. She had called me in tears after reading about the emergency guardianship order. "I tried talking to him," she said, her voice tight. "He won't listen. He thinks the family money is a game. He doesn't understand what it took to build it." "I know," I said. "But Margaret foresaw it. We have the codicil. And now, we have Samuel. Quiet allies. We're not alone." Clara nodded. "What do we do first?" "We gather evidence," I said. "Not just the codicil. Everything, financial mismanagement, improper transfers, any sign he's violated his fiduciary duty. We need an airtight case before confronting him. And no one can know I have the compass yet." Days passed. I kept a low profile in the apartment, walking early, calling old contacts discreetly, speaking with Daniel at dawn or dusk when Ethan was least likely to notice. Every evening, I revisited the compass, the codicil, and Margaret's note. Each time, I felt her presence, steady, guiding. Samuel came by twice a week. We catalogued every document, every past ledger, every signed contract Ethan had touched. Slowly, a picture emerged: unauthorized withdrawals, extravagant bonuses, investment mistakes hidden behind false entries. The empire he thought he owned was riddled with cracks. One morning, Daniel stopped me mid-sentence over the phone. "Edward, there's one more thing. Margaret's codicil mentioned something subtle, something that could speed this up. It's called the reversion clause. Essentially, if Ethan ever forcibly locks you out or mismanages, we can petition the court to restore full rights immediately, bypassing some guardianship hurdles. But we must present it before any further transfers or sales occur." I stared out the window, watching gulls ride the wind above the harbor. I could see my house from here, the towers, the gates, the sprawling lawns. For the first time in a week, it felt like it might still be mine. Not by Ethan's mercy, but by Margaret's foresight and my own persistence. That night, as I held the compass close, I whispered to it, "You've been my anchor, old friend. Let's see if this boy remembers the value of what he's standing on." I slept fitfully, dreams crowded with memories of Margaret laughing in the kitchen, of Ethan as a boy running barefoot across the lawn. I saw the house not as a prison, but as a chessboard. And I, finally, was back in the game. The sun had barely lifted over the harbor when I drove to Whitmore Point. I didn't want to be recognized. Ethan had eyes everywhere, and his private security team could spot a familiar car in a mile. I wore a flat cap, an old overcoat that had belonged to Margaret, and dark glasses. Samuel waited in the shadows near the service entrance, ready to guide me in. "You sure about this?" he asked, voice low. "If Ethan sees you." "I've waited a week," I said. "I can wait another hour, another day. But I need to see the house. My house." He nodded and led me along the gravel path behind the estate. The gardens were immaculate, yet sterile, perfectly trimmed, every flower in place, but missing Margaret's wild roses, missing warmth. It felt like a museum rather than a home. We entered through the servants' entrance. The interior smelled of lemon polish and fear, Ethan's way of asserting control, I realized. He had changed the locks, installed cameras in rooms I'd once roamed freely, and left notes in Margaret's handwriting style on some doors to confuse visitors. Samuel chuckled softly. "He's dramatic," he muttered. We made our way to the study, where I once kept ledgers, blueprints, and papers stacked high on oak shelves. I examined the room carefully, noting subtle signs of mismanagement, unopened mail, statements that contradicted each other, investment reports with missing signatures. He'd been sloppy, overconfident. On the desk lay a checkbook, its pages half filled with reckless withdrawals. My pulse quickened. Evidence. This is what we needed, proof of mismanagement, to accompany Margaret's codicil. Then came the first sign of his confidence faltering. A soft footstep on the staircase. We ducked behind a tall cabinet. Ethan appeared, speaking into his phone. Yes, I've moved the remaining bonds into the offshore account. No one will challenge it. Grandfather? He's in his little apartment, nothing to worry about. I run this place. Samuel's whisper cut through the tension. He's talking to himself, overconfident. He thinks he's untouchable. I clenched my fists. Every boast he made over the phone, every overreach, was evidence we could use. His arrogance was the wedge that would split him. We spent hours cataloging documents, snapping photos with a discreet camera Samuel had brought. Every ledger, every bond certificate, every note signed without proper authority added weight to the case. By late afternoon, I allowed myself a quiet moment, walking to the window that overlooked the cliffs. The sea stretched vast and gray, indifferent to family quarrels, indifferent to stolen fortunes. Yet there was a certain poetry in that vastness, a reminder that no matter how large a man's ego, nature has always been patient. Sir? Samuel's voice interrupted my reverie. I think you should see the vault. The vault, a reinforced steel room in the basement that Ethan had boasted about. He had bragged about its security when he first took over. Now, we were inside. Samuel keyed the combination with care. You remember it? He asked. I did. Every digit etched into memory, from the first time Margaret and I installed it. The door swung open with a metallic groan. Inside, bonds, ledgers, and some company artifacts, some even from my father's era, were stacked haphazardly. Ethan hadn't even bothered to sort them. This, I said, my voice low, is the evidence we need. Then I noticed it, a small, leather-bound notebook, partially hidden beneath a pile of bond certificates. I opened it and froze. It was Ethan's personal ledger, not just company transactions but personal spending, extravagant trips, questionable loans, and transfers made without board approval. He had been careless, overconfident, and blind to scrutiny. This will make the court listen, I murmured. Samuel nodded. You're going to need all of this, sir. Every page. You can't leave anything behind. I looked around the room, feeling a mixture of triumph and sadness. This was my life's work, tainted by the actions of my own blood. Yet, for the first time, I felt hope. Ethan's overreach was his weakness. His arrogance had become his undoing. As we left the vault, I paused near the doorway, staring at the walls adorned with family portraits. Ethan had rearranged them, placing himself front and center. The audacity of it, a boy who had barely earned a tenth of what built this empire. I felt a strange mix of sorrow and resolve. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, legacy, and the truth. We exited through the back again, unnoticed. The sky had darkened, clouds heavy, threatening rain. I looked back at the house one last time. Soon, very soon, Ethan would understand that stealing from your grandfather is a dangerous gamble, especially when the grandfather knows every secret corridor, every hidden key, and every clause written long before the thief was born. That night, I reviewed the compass and codicil again. Margaret had equipped me with more than a legal tool, she had given me insight into human nature. Overconfidence. Arrogance. Impatience. Ethan exhibited all three in abundance. I began drafting a plan, gather witnesses, compile financial evidence, and petition the court using the codicil and reversion clause. The chessboard was set, pieces moving quietly in my favor. The first cracks were showing, I could feel it. The morning was sharp with frost, the kind that bites your cheeks and clears your head. I walked the streets of Hartford, past shuttered shops and early commuters, thinking about leverage. Documents alone weren't enough. To topple Ethan's grip, I needed people, witnesses, former employees, anyone who had seen the empire before he treated it like a playground. I first visited Gerald Hayes, former chief accountant, now retired, living in a modest townhouse cluttered with ledgers and framed photos of company milestones. Gerald had been a loyal man for decades, but he'd grown wary of Ethan's audacity. "I don't want trouble," Gerald said cautiously, when I explained the situation. "But I've noticed discrepancies, transfers, bonuses, offshore accounts, things that shouldn't exist." "Exactly," I said, leaning closer. "We need records, Gerald. Everything you can give me. Emails, ledgers, notes, anything showing improper conduct." He hesitated, thinking. "I've kept copies of some audits, hidden in a safe deposit box. I always feared what would happen if the young master ever got full control." I felt a surge of relief. "Then you've already done half the work for me. We just need it documented, and the court will listen." Next, I contacted Margaret's former secretary, Louise, now working at a small legal office across town. She had managed day-to-day correspondence at the estate before Ethan took over. Her eyes widened when I explained my predicament. "I tried to warn him," she said. "I flagged multiple irregularities, but he ignored everything. Took his grandfather's empire like it was a game." She produced letters, memos, and meeting notes. Her handwriting meticulous, the papers chronicled mismanagement, misuse of funds, and blatant disregard for protocol. I realized that, even unwittingly, the people Ethan had overlooked were my allies. By noon, the pile on my small desk in the apartment had grown large enough to fill a small briefcase. Every document, every witness, every note added weight. Ethan thought he had locked me out, but he had underestimated the stubbornness of an old man with a compass, a codicil, and decades of experience. That afternoon, I met with Daniel. "Ethan will sense if we move too fast," he cautioned. "He's paranoid, but he's also reckless. We need to control the narrative, keep him from knowing the evidence exists until the court date." "Agreed," I said. "We'll move slowly. Quietly. Every step planned." Daniel nodded. "We have one advantage. Your grandson doesn't anticipate subtlety. He's accustomed to brash moves, announcements, and headlines. All we need is the element of quiet strategy." That evening, Samuel returned with an update. "Security's lighter than usual," he said. "He's distracted, holding a private dinner for investors. His focus is elsewhere." I rubbed my temples. The house loomed in my memory, walls echoing laughter, whispers, and ambition. Now, it was a gilded cage, but one that I could still unlock. "Good," I murmured. "Every absence is a chance to uncover a truth." We planned a quiet recon into the study again, this time to collect evidence of physical mismanagement. Files left in drawers, confidential letters, correspondence Ethan hadn't thought to remove. Every misstep became a building block for my case. By nightfall, I had photographs, scanned documents, and written witness statements. Each item was catalogued, cross-referenced, and stored safely. Margaret's codicil remained the linchpin, but without these pieces, it would have been just an empty clause. I sat in the small apartment, looking at the compass once more. It had led me to the codicil, and now, it felt like a talisman, guiding me through betrayal and treachery. I whispered her name, "Margaret, your foresight is why I'm still standing." Yet even as hope grew, I sensed the weight of isolation. Ethan's influence had pushed other family members away. I was alone in the fight, except for Samuel, Gerald, Louise, and Daniel, allies loyal but cautious. I had to move carefully. One wrong move could alert Ethan, and he'd bury the house and the evidence deeper, claiming authority faster than I could respond. Late that night, I reviewed the documents again. My eyes rested on one in particular, a ledger showing unauthorized withdrawals and unapproved bonuses that Ethan had funneled into accounts with no explanation. It was blatant mismanagement, but I knew a single page wouldn't be enough. I needed corroboration from Gerald, Louise, and the codicil itself. I also noted the timing. Ethan had left town the next morning for a board retreat. A small window opened for me to retrieve a few remaining physical proofs from the manor without risking confrontation. I leaned back in the chair, sipping lukewarm coffee. My hands, though aged and slightly trembling, still held determination. The fight was far from over, but the first cracks in Ethan's empire were visible, like fissures in a mountain that only need pressure to split wide open. I waited until dusk, when the horizon glowed pink over the harbor, before leaving the apartment. The streets were emptying, and the chill in the air sharpened my senses. Samuel drove me to a side entrance of Whitmore Point, the one near the old gardener's shed. It had been decades since I'd entered that way, and yet every brick and corner felt familiar, etched into memory. "Stay close," I whispered. "We move quickly, quietly." Samuel nodded, clutching a small duffel bag. "Security is lighter tonight. Ethan's entertaining investors. Cameras are on motion, but only in public areas. Your old study and the archives are mostly unmonitored." I pressed a hand against the wrought iron gate. It felt cold, unyielding, yet it was still my home. The thought steeled me. No force could make an empire disappear if its rightful owner remembered its secrets. Inside, the house smelled of polished wood and lemon cleaner. It was immaculate, too immaculate. Ethan had tried to erase history, to remake the house in his image. But certain details could not be hidden: the portraits of my parents, the engraved mantel, the old grandfather clock ticking steadily in the hall. Each one whispered the story Ethan sought to rewrite. We reached the study. Samuel went first, pulling aside a heavy rug that concealed the safe's original lock. Years ago, I had installed a secondary compartment behind a false panel. Only I and Margaret knew its location. Ethan had never found it. "Here it is," I whispered, pressing the hidden latch. The panel slid open, revealing a stack of folders and envelopes I hadn't seen in years. My pulse quickened. Every document inside was a record of proper management, signatures, and original contracts, undeniable proof that Ethan's unilateral changes were illegitimate. Then, a sound froze me: footsteps on the marble floor above. Light laughter, unmistakable, too casual. Ethan had returned early from his dinner. My stomach dropped. "Stay quiet," I hissed to Samuel. We froze in the shadows. The footsteps paused near the study entrance. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. A door clicked. My eyes locked on the compass in my coat pocket, the codicil folded neatly inside. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then the footsteps retreated, fading down the hallway. Ethan had passed without noticing us. My heart thumped in my chest like a warning drum. "Close call," Samuel muttered. "Too close. We need to move faster next time." We quickly photographed the documents, scanned signatures, and even jotted notes about irregularities. Every page Samuel touched became evidence of Ethan's overreach. By the time we were ready to leave, the house felt different, smaller, fragile. The aura of invincibility Ethan had tried to project was cracking, and I could almost smell it, like paper left too long in the sun. As we exited through the service corridor, I paused to glance at the grand staircase. The portrait stared back at me, ancestors, watching silently. I could almost hear Margaret's voice: "Keep your patience, Edward. The board is your chessboard. Move carefully." I nodded to myself. Patience. Strategy. Evidence. We had 3 of the 4 pieces. All that remained was timing. Back in the apartment, I laid everything on the table, scanned ledgers, photographs, letters, codicil, and compass. Daniel arrived shortly after, reviewing each item meticulously. "This," he said, pointing to Ethan's ledger of unauthorized transactions, "will show clear mismanagement. Combine it with the codicil and witness statements, and we have a strong case. The court cannot ignore it." I leaned back, feeling the weight of both exhaustion and anticipation. The battle was nearing its decisive stage. Ethan had no idea how close I was to reclaiming what was rightfully mine, what Margaret had safeguarded. That night, I slept fitfully, visions of the manor flickering behind closed eyelids. Ethan's arrogance had made him careless, his fearlessness had been his undoing. But there was still risk. One misstep, one exposure, and he could attempt to bury the evidence, delay proceedings, or even smear my credibility. I held the compass in my hand before drifting off. Its brass surface was cool, reassuring. Margaret's foresight had given me the key, but my actions would turn it into a weapon. By morning, the plan was clear: consolidate evidence, coordinate witnesses, and petition the court. Ethan's moment of reckoning was approaching. The morning of the hearing was crisp, with sunlight glinting off the courthouse windows. I arrived early, dressed in a simple navy suit, walking slowly to control the tremor in my legs. Samuel, Gerald, and Louise followed discreetly, carrying documents and evidence. Daniel had secured seats near the front for us, but the tension in the hallway was palpable, reporters and onlookers murmuring about the Whitmore estate, eager for drama. Ethan arrived later, sharp and polished, exuding confidence. He smiled at the press, shaking hands, projecting the image of a man in command. But I noticed a flicker in his eyes, a micro-expression of unease, perhaps sensing that his control wasn't absolute. Inside the courtroom, the judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Albright, called the session to order. Daniel rose first. He laid out our case with precision: unauthorized transfers, mismanagement of funds, and most importantly, the codicil and reversion clause hidden for years in the compass. He introduced the documents carefully, letting each piece of evidence build on the last. "Your Honor," Daniel said, voice steady, "these actions demonstrate a clear violation of fiduciary duty by the temporary guardian, Mr. Ethan Whitmore. Furthermore, the codicil prepared by Margaret Whitmore provides that control of the estate reverts to Edward Whitmore under these exact circumstances." Ethan shifted in his seat, leaning toward his attorney, whispering rapidly. He looked confident, but it was forced, the kind of confidence that comes from bluffing. Next, Gerald Hayes and Louise were called to testify. Gerald presented ledgers, highlighting irregularities and unauthorized withdrawals. Louise described the ignored warnings and mismanaged correspondence. Each detail chipped away at Ethan's image as a competent steward. I listened quietly, absorbing their testimony, heart racing with each affirmation of truth. When Daniel finally presented the compass and codicil, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. I stepped forward to explain Margaret's foresight, the clause she had hidden, and how it ensured the estate remained protected. My voice didn't tremble, it carried decades of experience and the quiet authority of a man who had built everything from scratch. Ethan's attorney tried to object, claiming the codicil was irrelevant and retroactive, but Judge Albright interrupted firmly. "The document is notarized and legally binding. Relevance is clear." Ethan's face tightened. His lawyer tried to salvage control, presenting a list of supposed approvals and directives. But Daniel countered each one, pointing to mismatched dates, missing signatures, and irregular transactions. For the first time, Ethan's composure cracked. He stood, voice raised, accusing me of scheming, of manipulation, of orchestrating a plot to reclaim what he believed was his inheritance. But Daniel remained calm, producing the final piece, the signed reversion clause and witness statements from Samuel, Gerald, and Louise. The judge examined them, flipping through pages deliberately. The tension in the room was electric. I watched Ethan's confidence drain with each page turned, each testimony heard. The audience, family members, staff, even a few curious neighbors, leaned forward. Every eye in the room seemed to follow him as the weight of truth settled. Finally, Judge Albright leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, the court finds that the actions undertaken in your temporary guardianship exceeded legal authority and constitute mismanagement. The reversion clause and codicil are valid and enforceable. Control of the Whitmore estate reverts to Edward Whitmore immediately." A hush fell over the courtroom. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed, eyes wide. He had not anticipated this. The law, combined with foresight, had undone him. I felt a strange mixture of relief and vindication. The documents, the witnesses, the compass, and Margaret's foresight had all aligned perfectly. My hands were steady as I collected the codicil and compass, and for the first time in a week, I smiled. Justice hadn't required violence or vengeance, only patience, intelligence, and truth. Outside the courthouse, the press circled, but I ignored them. Samuel, Gerald, and Louise nodded at me, silent acknowledgement passing between us. Ethan's downfall wasn't public humiliation, it was far subtler and far more permanent. He had lost authority, credibility, and the empire he'd tried to claim. That night, I returned to Whitmore Point. The gates opened smoothly, my fingerprint recognized, my name restored. The house smelled of polish, roses, and history. I walked through the halls slowly, touching the walls, remembering Margaret, remembering the life we had built. For the first time in days, I felt fully at home. The first morning back at Whitmore Point was quiet, the kind of stillness that carries both relief and reflection. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the study, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air. I sat at my old desk, the brass compass in one hand, Margaret's codicil in the other, and allowed myself a long, deep breath. The house felt alive again, not as a monument to wealth, but as a repository of family memory and history. Samuel entered quietly, carrying tea. "It's all secure now, sir," he said. "No interference from anyone." I nodded, feeling a weight lift. "Margaret foresaw everything," I murmured. "She trusted the truth more than men. That trust saved this house." Word of the court's ruling spread quickly through the town. Ethan avoided public appearances, though a few curious neighbors reported seeing him silently moving into a smaller apartment near the city. The tabloids had their story, but the fallout was quieter than I expected. No dramatic shouting matches, no arrests, only the slow, social consequences of a young man who had overreached. Former associates, investors, and even family members began distancing themselves from him. His arrogance had made him untouchable in his own mind, but in the world outside, his credibility was gone. I heard about it through friends and discreet calls. Clara Whitmore called in tears of relief, finally able to breathe again without fearing Ethan's interference. Gerald and Louise were quietly thanked and given small tokens of appreciation, nothing grand, just the acknowledgement of their loyalty and courage. Walking through the gardens, I noticed the wild roses that Margaret had always loved. They had grown back, untended for a season, wild but beautiful. I pruned a few, whispering Margaret's name, realizing that legacy is not just wealth or deeds, but the life and care we leave behind. I summoned Ethan for a meeting at the house. I didn't want to humiliate him, that wasn't the lesson Margaret had written into her codicil. When he arrived, he was stiff, eyes downcast, hands clasped tightly. "Ethan," I said gently, "you've lost authority over the estate. But this isn't about revenge. It's about responsibility. A family is more than money. Do you understand what you did wrong?" He swallowed, voice barely audible. "Yes. Grandfather. I took what wasn't mine." I nodded. "Good. Learn from it. Respect comes from action, not inheritance. The house, the land, the trust, they will remain in responsible hands. And you have a chance to rebuild yourself, but start by acknowledging your mistakes. He nodded again, this time with more sincerity, and I let him leave without further words. The lesson had been delivered quietly, permanently, without spectacle. That evening, I walked the halls alone, turning over old photographs, letters from Margaret, and journals from years past. I realized the compass, once a simple memento, had become the ultimate symbol of foresight and patience. The codicil ensured justice without violence. The evidence we had gathered reinforced the importance of diligence and attention. I also thought about the subtle karma that had unfolded. Ethan had not been publicly shamed, yet every action he had taken came back to him. Friends distanced themselves, investments stalled, and the court stripped his control. Justice, measured and fair, had consequences, and he was living them. In the days that followed, I restored Whitmore Point to its rightful rhythm. Staff returned, gardens were tended, and the estate began to feel like a home again. I donated parts of the trust as Margaret had instructed, ensuring the Whitmore Heritage Foundation carried forward her vision. The town recognized the estate not just as property, but as a symbol of foresight, care, and legacy preserved. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I touched the brass compass, feeling Margaret's guidance in every groove. I thought about Ethan, hoping he learned his lessons, and about the fragility of trust, even within families. Finally, I sat in the study with tea, looking out over the cliffs at the Atlantic, feeling gratitude and peace. The storm of betrayal had passed. I had survived, inherited wisdom, and reclaimed what mattered most. Whitmore Point remained standing, a home, a legacy, and a testament to patience, foresight, and quiet justice. Author's note. This story demonstrates that justice does not require violence or revenge. Foresight, patience, and careful strategy can right wrongs effectively. The grandson faced proportionate consequences, loss of authority, diminished reputation, and social isolation, while the grandfather regained not just property, but dignity and legacy. Margaret's foresight reminds us that planning, knowledge, and moral clarity are sometimes the strongest weapons in any family conflict. Even betrayal within bloodlines can be corrected through intelligence, evidence, and measured action.